It feels like we're watching a shift, not just in America, not just in politics, but in the kinds of questions this moment is forcing us to confront. Questions about power, about accountability, about who controls resources, and whether institutions that we have still have the strength to restrain those who seek to concentrate authority. Against that backdrop, the Trump administration appears to be floundering. That doesn't make it harmless. In many ways, an administration losing its footing can actually become more dangerous. But Trump's opinions appear to be narrowing. And we can see the signs across several different fronts. Let's look at immigration enforcement. So, 2 men were recently shot and killed by federal immigration agents during vehicle encounters both in Texas and in Maine. Neither man was reportedly the intended target of the underlining operation, but in both cases, the government initially described the vehicles as weapons or suggested that agents faced an immediate threat. Witnesses, though, and local officials have disputed really important parts of both of those accounts, and the Department of Homeland Security then moved to pause many of its ICE vehicle stops, but almost immediately, Trump publicly demanded those stops continue. So, even when members of his own administration recognize that a tactic has become politically and operationally disastrous, Trump cannot tolerate anything that looks like a retreat. The policy is now confused, the public, the explanations conflict, and the family of those killed still deserve independent investigations and truthful answers. This cannot be reduced to whether someone supports or opposes immigration enforcement. The question is whether federal agents can kill people, provide disputed accounts of what's happened, and then avoid outside scrutiny. A nation governed by laws cannot accept that. Every person in the U.S., citizen or non-citizen, documented or undocumented, is entitled to due process. That means that they deserve to be heard. That doesn't mean everyone has a legal right to remain in the country, but it does mean the government must follow the law when determining whether they do. Detention cannot become a black hole where people disappear from public view or lose access to attorneys or are denied the opportunity to challenge the government's actions before a judge. The administration's escalating use of detention or aggressive street enforcement or even just force is really creating enormous political consequences. And now those consequences are landing in places Republicans cannot easily ignore. One of the killings occurred in Maine, where Senator Susan Collins is facing re-election and where protesters are directly connecting her votes for expanded immigration enforcement funding to what federal agents are doing with that money. This is what political accountability looks like. Members of Congress do not get to vote for tens of billions of dollars in enforcement funding and then get to act surprised when voters ask how that money is being used. At the same time, we have Republicans who are operating with increasingly little room for error in Congress. The unexpected death of Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell's prolonged absence have only complicated the Senate's work. Graham was deeply involved in the Judiciary Committee and in advancing Trump's nominees and legislative priorities. The Republican majority still exists, but its ability to move controversial legislation and nominations is becoming increasingly fragile. The House majority is also extraordinarily narrow. So Congress has struggled to pass major legislation, and honestly, the possibility of Democrats winning control of at least one of these chambers in November is very, very real. That possibility appears to terrify Trump, and we're watching a very familiar pattern emerge. So as political pressure increases, the instinct isn't to become more transparent, it's to consolidate more control. History has shown us that when leaders begin losing confidence in public support, they often stop trying to persuade, and they begin protecting power itself. Trump is at it once again, returning to false claims about the 2020 election. He had his primetime address and just went into lies and things that honestly were not worth listening to. He is pushing the Save American Act. He's demanding documentary proof of citizenship for voter registration. He's trying to pass this off as election security. But honestly, this could prevent eligible American citizens from voting, specifically married women who, no longer carry their last name and their birth certificate doesn't match their current last name. This also affects lower income voters who can't simply obtain the required records. And this really has an impact. So Trump is also once again pressuring Republicans to eliminate the Senate filibuster to enact his agenda. And I want to ask, why is a sitting president so consumed with really relitigating an election from 6 years ago? Because the 2026 election is approaching, and moments like this often reveal what people fear losing most. Right now, this administration appears increasingly focused on preserving power rather than persuading the public, because losing either chamber of Congress would mean investigations, real investigations, subpoenas, hearings, financial records, contracts, testimony under oath. The public could begin learning much more about the flow of money that's going through his administration, contracts awarded to politically connected companies, the Trump family's crypto profits, different foreign investments that are connected to members of the family, and honestly, the administration's handling of the Epstein files. Trump has enjoyed almost complete protection from a Republican Congress. If Democrats do gain control of even one chamber, that protection would end. His public reaction is not by itself proof of any crime, but it does suggest he understands what meaningful congressional oversight could uncover, and he's acting like someone determined to prevent it. That is why we should expect the attack on the electoral system to intensify. Trump has spent years teaching his supporters that any election he loses must be fraudulent. That argument is not merely about his ego, it's a preemptive attack on the legitimacy of any institution capable of restraining him. If Congress opposes him, Congress is corrupt. If courts rule against him, the judges are corrupt. If journalists uncover misconduct, the media is an enemy. If voters reject his party, the election was stolen. It feels like we're moving into a period where one of the defining questions isn't simply who wins elections. It's whether institutions remain stronger than individuals. Because once political power becomes centered on a single person instead of constitutional processes, every disagreement becomes framed as betrayal, and every institution becomes an enemy. That's the path that authoritarian movements have followed throughout history. But authoritarianism is not invincible. The Senate vote demonstrated that elected officials can still say no. The growing House support for ending unconditional military aid to Israel demonstrates that public pressure can move positions once considered politically untouchable, the outrage over ICE shootings really shows us that communities can force abuses into public view. And Trump's frantic reversals demonstrate that he's not operating from a position of unlimited strength like he tries to show. The administration is dangerous, but it's also vulnerable. Those two things can be true at the same time. And so the answer is not to look away. It is not to become numb every time Trump produces another outrageous statement. And it's not to chase every piece of bait he throws into the news cycle. The answer is sustained pressure around things that matter. No unauthorized war with Iran, no blank checks for the Pentagon, no unconditional military assistance without accountability, no federal enforcement agency operating above the law, no attack on the voting rights of eligible American citizens, and no president, Republican or Democrat, who is permitted to replace constitutional government with personal rule. For once, Congress created a roadblock. Now the public has to make sure it holds. And before we go, one additional piece of genuinely lighter news. The House has voted to end the twice-a-year clock change and establish permanent daylight savings time. I don't know if I'm for this or against this. Honestly, I have no problem moving my clock forward and backwards, but it was overwhelmingly bipartisan. It still has to pass the Senate, and obviously that's not guaranteed, but we'll see what happens. So yes, after everything else we've discussed, Congress may finally save us from watching the sun disappear in the middle of the afternoon every winter. So follow me and let's continue breaking down American stories as they happen in politics.